Let me start us in prayer. Papa, thank you so much for bringing everyone here safely in this weather tonight and getting us together to be able to have this time to fellowship. I thank you for my brothers and sisters and for the fact that you've given us the love that we have between each other and this program that allows us to be able to not be alone and to be able to heal with you, because there is no other way to heal. And I just ask you to be with me as I give my testimony tonight, and to be with everyone else that needs to hear whatever it is that they need to hear. Lord, put it on their heart or put it in their ear, and Lord, bless their empty chairs. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Well, good evening, Forever family. I'm a grateful, faithful believer who struggles with my mental and my physical health, but I celebrate recovery from cancer and past childhood traumas, and my name is Chris.
Hey, Chris.
I spent my earlier years living in Lenexa, Virginia. Most of my family lived nearby in Norwich, Virginia. I grew up on dirt roads, farm living. We even had an outhouse and a party line. I also, unfortunately, grew up with a great deal of physical, sexual, and emotional trauma. To really start at the beginning of my story, I have to start with a piece of my bio mom's. During one of the many family spats that we had, my aunt let it slip one night that I was a product of date rape. She said I never even had a chance anyhow, it figures. My aunt continued to talk about my mother's sickness, her bipolar disorder, and I later learned she also had Munchausen syndrome by proxy as well. I learned early I was never meant to be, nor was I wanted, and through the years, many incidents would reinforce these negative thoughts. Some of my earliest memories were with my older cousin. When I was around 5, we were playing with our elder cousin in the room, and he began to abuse me, and then he directed my other cousin to do the same. Me being family didn't falter their actions. At one point, I went to the living room to tell mine and their mothers what had happened. I was brushed off and told that it was horse playing and roughhousing. I was actually scolded and then sent back to the bedroom with them, acting as though nothing had happened. That became a trend in my life. I found myself wondering later in life, who would I have grown up to be if the allegations would have been believed and immediately taken care of, if he was appropriately punished. But that's not my story. My life experiences continued to be abusive. I didn't see the elder of my cousins but once or twice over the years, but he had done his damage, setting the path that the other cousin would continue. My mother often visited and left me at the house, and the abuse continued, even including his friend once. I didn't understand why he involved his friend. It had always been a secret, private family thing before. My young mind mistook family for acceptance of these actions, and in trusting my family, I grew very confused, but I allowed it to continue. While the abuse was occurring, I would learn to detach myself as I waited for it to be over. Later that night, I told my cousin's adult sister about how they bullied me that day. She was the one that called the police, and I was taken to the hospital, and the doctor found evidence that there was an assault. And after hours of intimidating and hounding by my family, I was manipulated into calling it all consensual. They had me shift all the blame to my cousin's friend, and it never went to trial. This was my first lesson in justice not being the norm. I learned to keep quiet and to again go on acting as if nothing had happened. As a result of the abuse, I began to cut myself, which went on for a couple of years, and I began to blame God. My first prayer to God, I asked him if he would make me a boy. When he didn't, that's when my anger first began for God, and I chose to ignore him. But he never ignored me. I can remember the feeling of arms and of warmth and even a light on occasions being there with me. I know now exactly where God has been my whole life. I was the one that was always running. I did not have much of a relationship with my bio father, so I was really excited when my mother dated a man who did lots of family things with us. However, he became more interested in me than her, and he began to abuse me. I was 9 years old when his grooming was swiftly underway, and it's around this point somewhere that I developed emotional dysregulation disorder. Truthfully, I don't remember having much of a childhood past the age of 9. They got married when I was 10, and the next chapter of abuse entered my life. He told me I was too expensive and I had to earn my worth. After all, my bio father did not pay any real child support. I then learned that there was no shortage of abusers in this world. This man was a sex trafficker, and he began to sell me to other men, which occurred several times a week. This continued until I was 16 and had lost over 2,200 days of my life to it. It's funny, that seems really small to me, because I really thought it would be more. And you may be wondering how I survived up until this point. So I'm going to tell you, for me, it's normal. I never even spoke of this sex trafficking before 3 years ago. Why would I? When I was abused in the past, I wasn't given healthy support. All I got was indignation. I attempted to tell family, friends, the school, and the police over the years, learning time and again to act like nothing had happened, to keep things in. That in burying these things, I could pretend that I was better, and partly that allowed the abusive patterns to continue to occur throughout my life. I sat by quietly while my reputation was beaten to a pulp. The family clearly believed the lies of this sick man and woman. They were comfortable concluding, since they had not witnessed the abuse, that it had not occurred. Both no one believing me and the abuse itself led to many poor coping skills to deal with the trauma. Some of the poor coping skills included running away at 16, having sex with other men, not being married, ending up in detention and then later ending up in jail, and self-medicating with alcohol at the tender age of 13. Blessedly, I was able to quit alcohol, but that left me going back to feeling insignificant and always afraid. I didn't know what happiness or truth was by this point. I developed a defense mechanism by turning into a tomboy, hoping that that would turn them away. It didn't. I lost trust in people, and I lost trust in myself. At 18, I was working at Food Lion in Winsburg, and I met a man that I would marry. He would pursue me for months. He gave me his number, and though I wanted to call, I hesitated because I had a checklist of things that I wanted in my life. I intended to follow it. It was marriage, kids, the whole 9 yards. But by high school graduation 2002, we were official. We just hit 22 years together. How the time passing really astounds me sometimes. There were difficulties with nightmares and flashbacks, but my husband was tenderly there helping me navigate and combat my demons by my side. I was certain I'd found the fantasy, the knight in shining armor. Now, he actually turned out to be my dwarf in tinfoil, y'all, but that's not a complaint. Despite being told I might never have kids and having a couple of miscarriages because of the damage, in 2003, we had our first daughter. 9 months later, our first son, and our second son and daughter just as quickly followed. God certainly showed off. Things were beautiful and messy, and I lived for those days. But my story isn't over. In 2013, my family faced something we never expected or thought possible for us. CPS was called, and one thing after another happened, and our children ended up in foster care. We had no good family in the area or in the state or real friends at the time to turn to. So we didn't see the kids again for 3 months. I grew very depressed, and I thought I'd never see them again. I was so angry at God because he was the one that let this happen to me. I told myself that I wanted to know why. Why, God? So I began to seek church. I think I was so blinded by the need to grab God and shake him physically that I was going to walk into one of these churches and physically find him there. I did find him all right. Of course, it took some time to sink in. I think God was always trying to show me that he was there and I should have been reaching out to him the whole time. I had neglected God and the church for years. On many Sundays, my bio father would take me to my grandmother's church. That was the extent of my church life. So I didn't have much of a relationship with God. I believed in him on occasions, but more often than not, I just believed that there was a God. I didn't live in his light, certainly didn't do his works or glorify his name. Simply saying I believed didn't make me a true Christian, I learned. Guess I wasn't such a great person after all. I learned so much about myself, and I'm still learning. And if finding God would have been the only good thing that came out of that mess, I finally could say that's enough, and in fact, I'm grateful for it. And in November 2013, over 10 years ago, I finally grieved and gave my kids back to God. Thanks to God, I have several amazing women that showed me a way of life that helped me be a better person and feel loved. I had a thirst for the Bible and for his word, which led to another decision that marked my life. I decided to be baptized Easter Sunday, 2014. But it wasn't all good. God had further lessons and blessings in store for me. We received paperwork to have our parental rights severed. Depression was my constant companion, and it led me straight to an institution after attempted suicide. While I was in the institution, I turned back to God. There was no chaplain there, so I always had my Bible out. People began to ask questions, and one day while they were gathered around me, apparently I was leading the Bible study, I heard a voice. It said, "Did you see what I did there? I gave you mountains so you can show others that they could be moved." And I knew instantly, with a vision from God, exactly what I was meant to do. I was meant to be in mental health and a chaplain. I continued to return and minister to the people there when I was released, and I got a tattoo of a verse that would keep me going. Ecclesiastes 7:17. Don't be too sinful, and don't be foolish. Why would you go before your time comes? It wasn't long after, at a women's conference, I talked about my grief with the woman next to me. She liked to talk. Specifically, she liked to talk about Celebrate Recovery. I started attending immediately. I found such relief in being able to share, and I had a lot to share. I had a strong desire to be seen and heard back then, to get validation. So of course I jumped right into a step study. I never finished it, however. The emotions it unearthed were too hard for me to handle. It would take 4 more step studies before I thought I'd share all my pain. I thought that was it, and surely I must be recovered now, right? So I took a break from Celebrate Recovery at this point after only a few years. I was always searching, however. I popped in and out of Celebrate Recovery many times over the years for varying time frames. I just kept coming back. I know now I wasn't ready no matter how much I wanted it. Then I learned of my husband's affair with someone at our church. And I honestly thought I'd die from the pain. I remember physically hearing my heart crack. This was not the same pain that I had felt in past hurts that I had endured. This was when I learned what unconditional love was and believed in it, because I still loved him. Man, I felt foolish for that. The old feelings of worthlessness stuck back in as I began to have body image issues, wondering all too often what was wrong with me and why wasn't I desirable. This got worse when the minister of the church called a few days later to tell me I wasn't welcome at church anymore due to the parties that were involved in it there. I needed a meeting, and so I went back to Celebrate Recovery, and I got in a step study. But this time my husband followed, and he also began to engage himself. I still truly wasn't ready to apply the principles and the steps to my life. I struggled with step 3. We made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God. This required relinquishing control. And when I give Jesus the will, y'all, he be off-roading with me. With time came some healing in my marriage. It was Easter Sunday, 2016, and my husband, who was previously an agnostic, said he wanted me to get baptized with him. He wanted us to both have a fresh start in our marriage with God at the head this time. If God could forgive him completely, wiping his slate clean, who was I to do any different, he said. He'd be a new person with a new start, and that's something that I know about. I'd like to say my story was great after that, but it wasn't. I actually wouldn't recommend my story, even given the outcome, despite who I became. It hardened me, and it changed my view for far too long. And in a way, I stayed the victim, living in that victim mentality of poor me and it's everyone else's fault attitude, instead of addressing my part, my fault, my coping skills that were poor. Over the next few years, I experienced more church hurt and marriage search and, let's face it, life happening. God also kept strong women in my life. My first sponsor embodied gentleness and compassion that I did not even know I needed. My new best friend shared with me her time, her light, and even her mother. My second sponsor gave me wisdom, complete honesty, y'all, and the ability to finally trust again. In 2019, I started college. I would spend 4 years in med school maintaining a 4.0 GPA and getting over a dozen letters after my name. And I finally became a behavioral health technician working in a mental health office. I attended a few sporadic Celebrate Recovery meetings up until the summer of 2021, when I was getting my last certification. I was spirit-led back to Celebrate Recovery and back to a step study. It didn't take long to realize I hadn't done any of this step studies right and dealt with everything. But this time was different. God convicted me to be transparent, and I could no longer continue to find my identity in being a victim. I realized my background and my circumstances may have influenced who I was, but I ultimately was responsible for who I chose to become. I checked the selfishness, the anger, the mistrust, and the blame at the door of that step study. And this time I unpacked all the childhood abuse that I could, and the pain was immense. But I survived the abuse. By God, I will survive the recovery. I was finally ready to work the program. I was open to it all. That's when I experienced a spiritually freeing level of recovery that brought about a forgiveness and a healing that I had never even hoped for. It gave me the ability to put everything out into the universe so I could untangle the sick persons of my past from my future. Choosing to put down what wasn't mine, forgiving them all to save what was left of me. Reminding myself of my worth in God, who He says I am. And I take no credit because I know exactly what God did. The darkness I was exposed to in childhood seeped in deep, but there is no place that our God cannot reach. Amen. My husband and I started attending a new church that we had been watching online that we allowed God to lead us to. We found ourselves surrounded by many godly brothers and sisters, and come December we joined Broken Chains Jesus Christ, which is an organization of bikers and bike lovers who have found healing through recovery with Jesus Christ. With BCJC, we gained some new forever family, which came with new events, rallies, and rides. I even rode on a motorcycle again for the first time since I was 18, and my surrogate father died on one. We were co-leading at Celebrate Recovery, and I was learning the art of listening and keeping my mouth shut. A new chapter of life and healing had started, and God even brought Bio family back in our lives, including our oldest daughter, and we are in the process of restoring these relationships in love, and I'm following His lead and the program. Life still has hiccups. In 2022, I survived cancer twice, and the surgeries that came with it with the great Christian doctors that God made sure to provide. One of them even attended Celebrate Recovery. Then I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, but with the help of a lot of therapy, I began to start the long journey of rewiring my brain. And thanks to continuing to come back to Celebrate Recovery, I am healthier in mind and spirit to handle these things. And during my last evaluation a few months ago, testing revealed that I no longer scored high enough to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Now, I know that's not a cure because there isn't a cure, but I use my Dyer-like behavioral therapy skills every day, daily, to stay in what we call wise minds so that I can make healthy choices, staying aware of my habits so I can stay ahead of them. So to the newcomer, God, I love you. It's okay if you don't believe it or you're not ready to hear it yet. I wasn't once either, but there's enough hate in this world, and folks are hating for no reason at all. So why not love? We have the best reason at all. God said so. John 13:34, a new commandment I give to you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you also must love one another. So let me say it again. Feel free to say it with me or turn to your neighbor and say it. I love you. If there's one thing I hope you got from my testimony, it's the trend of keep coming back. Because I wouldn't have healed if I hadn't. I am proof that the program works if you work it. To those who have been around a while, you're so valuable and so needed. Someone was there for you, and now others need you to be there for them. So if you haven't yet found a way to serve, let today be your day. Step 12, having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and practice these principles in all of our affairs. I'm currently giving back by helping anywhere I'm needed at Celebrate Recovery, from setup and greetings to the roles in large groups like announcements, reading steps and principles. I lead small group. I lead step studies. I wrote and taught lessons. I'm the Celebrate Recovery mental health champion for my home, Celebrate Recovery. And of course, I'm sharing my testimony right now. I help my community by volunteering at the church food drive, Port for the Homeless, a nonprofit faith-based clinic that I work at, and in August 2023, I finally became a licensed chaplain. thanks to a dear friend, now mentor, who is also a chaplain. He is still surrounding me with strong sisters. My life verse can affectionately be found on my license plates, Ephesians 5:1-2. Therefore, be imitators of God. Copy him and follow his example. As well-beloved children, imitate their father and walk continually in love. That is, value one another and practice empathy and compassion, unselfishly seeking the best for others, just as Christ also loves you and gave himself up for us. I'm so glad you had me here tonight, and thank you for letting me share.